Hey guys, welcome to today's video. Now, today I'm going to be talking about a piece of news that was just released pertaining to The Mandalorian Season 2. Now, it is said that apparently in Season 2, we're going to be getting a bunch of appearances from established characters from the Skywalker saga. Now, I find this very interesting for multiple reasons. The Mandalorian takes place 5 years after Return of the Jedi, which of course released in 1983. So, unless they recast some of the human characters from the original trilogy, I doubt we'll see characters like Luke, Han, Leia, or Lando. We'll probably see some aliens, we'll probably see some droids, and potentially some characters who are known for wearing masks. Now, although this is closest to the original trilogy time-wise, you also can't rule out some of the past prequel trilogy characters, especially after learning some of the things that happened in The Mandalorian Season 1, and you also can't rule out some of the sequel trilogy characters. Now, the final thing that I find very intriguing is that it said Skywalker saga characters. Considering Dave Filoni worked on The Mandalorian, and obviously he's also known for doing the Clone Wars and Rebels, I'm kind of surprised that it didn't mention either of those shows, considering that both of them have quite a few characters that could be inserted into The Mandalorian. But now, without further ado, I'm going to jump into the characters from the Skywalker saga that I think we could see in The Mandalorian Season 2. Now, starting out with the prequel trilogy, unfortunately most of the characters that we knew from that era are dead. Anakin, Obi-Wan, Yoda, Padme, Mace Windu. Now, they could bring Mace Windu back, but I think if they did, that it would likely be for a much more prominent role as opposed to a side character in The Mandalorian. But obviously he is dead for now. But there are a handful of characters that we could still see in The Mandalorian from the prequels. First, let's just get R2-D2 and C-3PO out of the way. They have been in all of the Skywalker saga films. They've also made appearances in Rogue One, in the cartoons. They have been in Star Wars more than any other character, and while I don't think that they would play a prominent role, I wouldn't rule a potential cameo by them off the table. Some other characters we could potentially see from the prequels would be Jar Jar Binks, Boss Nass, and the Gungans. I highly doubt we'll see them because they're pretty much universally disliked. I mean, I love the prequels and even I don't like them. But it is a possibility. Bill Burr's character in The Mandalorian actually made jokes about Gungans, so you never know. Now, I wouldn't rule an appearance by him off the table, but if he did show up, it would be very minor. But if you remember from Attack of the Clones, Obi-Wan goes to meet an old friend at one point at a diner named Dexter Jetster. Now, we've seen the Mandalorian travel quite a bit and go into different bars or different little restaurants quite a few times, so perhaps he's on Coruscant and just happens to wander that way and we see him for a brief moment. So, I think that would be a cool little nod to the prequels, but I don't think we would see too much with that character. Now, here's one that really grabs my attention. If you remember in Attack of the Clones, when Obi-Wan finds out about the clone army, he's on the planet of Kamino, and he's talking to the Kaminoans. Now, in The Mandalorian, when we meet the character Dr. Pershing, we actually find out that he has a patch on his arm that is tied to the Kaminoan cloners, and a lot of people speculate that his interest in Baby Yoda has to do with cloning it. Maybe Baby Yoda is already a clone. And so I think it'd be really neat if they tied this into the Kaminoan clone somehow. Another prequel trilogy character that I think would be really interesting to see in The Mandalorian would be Commander Cody. Now, obviously in Star Wars Rebels, we saw some of the clones that defied Order 66, such as Captain Rex and some of the guys that were with him, but we really don't know much about some of the clones that went through with the Order and what they did afterwards. Commander Cody, obviously being the most significant of all of the clones that followed through with it. So I think it'd be really neat to see one of those clones who's just notoriously known for killing off the Jedi still lingering around. Now, finally from the prequels, I could see Chewbacca, Chief Tarful, and the Wookiees. Now, the most interesting thing about this is in Revenge of the Sith, Yoda says that he has good relations with the Wookiees, and that's obviously very apparent in his time on Kashyyyk in that movie. Now, I'm just trying to tie things together here, but obviously Baby Yoda being the same species as Yoda, perhaps the two species are very peaceful towards one another. Maybe they are like neighboring planets. Obviously, Yoda seems like a very peaceful individual, as well as most of the Wookiees, despite how much of a warrior race they are. So maybe that comes into play somehow. Now, over to the original trilogy characters. Let's first talk about Luke, Leia, Han, and Lando. Now, I certainly seem to be in the minority on this one, but I would absolutely love to see more with these characters, particularly if it was a post-Return of the Jedi animated series. I also wouldn't be opposed to seeing something live action, whether it's a series or a set of films, provided they cast the right people like Sebastian Stan, Anthony Gruber, and Billy Lord. But it seems to me that most people, whether they are huge fans of the sequel trilogy or absolutely cannot stand it, seem to want to move on from the Skywalker saga. And while I will agree to a certain extent, I think that the primary focus should shift to things like Knights of the Old Republic, I don't understand why we're limiting ourselves. There are so many writers and directors that would absolutely kill to work on any Star Wars project. We could have endless Star Wars content for years and years to come, so I don't know why people wouldn't be down to see more of these characters. But being that The Mandalorian is really its own thing and it's only 8 episodes and there's only a few different characters, and the characters that we've grown up and loved, Luke, Han, Leia, and Lando, are so significant to Star Wars lore, I think if they did anything else with those characters, it would likely be in their own series or set of films, whether it's animated or live action. But I will say, I think there is a chance to see Luke, particularly in The Mandalorian. I'm someone who doesn't really enjoy the sequel trilogy at all, but many people don't feel that way. Many people absolutely love it, many are growing up with it, and there's lots of casual fans too that have enjoyed the sequel trilogy. I will say The Last Jedi specifically is the most disliked Star Wars film by far. It is under 50% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes for the audience score, but most people were okay with The Force Awakens and The Rise of Skywalker and their handling of Han and Leia and Lando. Most problems that people have with The Last Jedi and the sequel trilogy stem from how Rian Johnson handled Luke. And I gotta tell you, that's the big one for me. That's the one that drives me nuts above all others. But what I don't understand is people who seem to agree with me and absolutely hate everything that they did with Luke in The Last Jedi don't seem to want to see any more of his character. They say Disney doesn't know how to handle our favorite characters, the ones that we've grown up with and the ones that we've loved for so long. Let's just move on from there. But personally, I think that Luke's character in The Last Jedi was so awful, and that's nothing on Mark Hamill's part. He was actually phenomenal from an acting perspective in that movie. But what they did with him and his character, it can't get worse than that. And I think the only way to improve our perception of Luke is to go at that character again, make Luke cool again. And so I really think that we need to see more from his character, whether it's animated or live action. So here's why I think Luke may show up in The Mandalorian. Even if you love The Last Jedi, Disney absolutely knows that its biggest mistake in handling Star Wars so far was The Last Jedi and its portrayal of Luke. And I think that Disney would probably agree with my thought process. I don't think that they want to have the legacy of being the ones who destroyed Luke Skywalker. I think they're going to try to right that wrong, and the easiest way to do that at first would probably just give him a brief appearance in a show that's not even about him. If they just showed him in The Mandalorian, and maybe he had a cool moment using the Force, or maybe some guys try to attack him and he's forced to defend himself, I think that that would make a lot of fans really happy, and then would possibly allow Disney to move forward with Luke Skywalker's character and do more with him in the future. Aside from the main original trilogy characters, I also think that we could see many of the bounty hunters, considering The Mandalorian is a bounty hunter, and we've run into many throughout the show already. I wouldn't say that it'd be far-fetched to see Boss, because we've seen Trandoshans in this show already. We've seen IG units, so potentially IG-88, and maybe even Boba Fett. People have been speculating forever that his Mandalorian armor saved him, and that he crawled out of the Sarlacc pit. I believe there was a book written on that, but right now in canon, that was his death, was at the Sarlacc pit. So it'd be really cool to see Boba Fett's return in this show. I mean, this show was originally supposed to be a Boba Fett spin-off, Rian Johnson has talked about doing something with Boba Fett, and like I said, people have been speculating about his return for decades because they were just so dissatisfied with his ending in Return of the Jedi. So I think it's highly possible that we see him in Season 2. And that could help even tie things together further with the whole clone theory, with Baby Yoda being a clone and Dr. Pershing and the Kaminoans. Bringing Boba Fett into that mix would just really help strengthen that whole idea. Some other characters from the original trilogy that could potentially be in this show, but I find it kind of unlikely, would be Mon Mothma, Admiral Akbar, and Nien Nunb. They actually got an actress to play Mon Mothma in Rogue One, so they would likely use her if she were to appear. Admiral Akbar and Nien Nunb are obviously both alien characters, so that wouldn't be too hard to do, but I don't really think any of those characters fit in with the vibe that they're going for in The Mandalorian. They definitely seem to be trying to show us the scum side of the universe more, the bounty hunters, the gangsters, the smugglers, so I don't think that showing, a political figure or somebody who was an admiral for the rebellion and the war would really fit in with what they're trying to do in The Mandalorian. One character that I actually sort of thought that we may see in this show, and after an image that Jon Favreau posted on Twitter, I'm even more convinced that we will see him, and that is Bib Fortuna. Now, if you don't remember Bib Fortuna, he is this disgusting looking freak of nature. Now, I believe that he is still alive, or at least that he was still alive after the Battle of Sarlacc, because I rewatched that scene and I tried to pause it and pick out where he was, and I was not able to account for him. And the reason that I think we may see him in The Mandalorian is because this is the image that Jon Favreau posted on Twitter after Season 1 of The Mandalorian. This looks like a Gamorrean guard, but it looks like a much bigger and stronger and more athletic version of the Gamorrean guard. But if you remember, we saw these at Jabba's palace. Now, I believe that Bib Fortuna probably stayed behind at Jabba's palace during the Battle of Sarlacc. Whatever happened after that, after he found out that Jabba died, I have no clue, but perhaps we'll find out, and we'll see him along with the Gamorrean guards in Season 2 of The Mandalorian. Now, being that The Mandalorian is set so soon after Return of the Jedi, there aren't too many sequel trilogy characters that I could see being in this show because characters like Kylo Ren, Rey, Finn, and Poe would either be super young or not even born yet at this point. But there are a couple characters from the sequels that I think would be pretty neat to see in this show. The first would be Lor San Tekka. He was the man that handed Poe the map that led to Luke Skywalker in the beginning of The Force Awakens. Based on the conversations that he had with Kylo Ren and with Poe, it certainly seemed like he had quite a bit of history with Leia and with the Rebellion, so I think it'd be really interesting if we learned anything more about this character and possibly had him pop up in The Mandalorian. Now, the other that I find incredibly interesting that I really hope we see more of is Maz Kanata. In The Force Awakens, I found her incredibly interesting. They built her up to be this super wise old character that has seen so many things because she's lived thousands of years, and I was really intrigued. But in The Last Jedi, they just absolutely squashed that character, and JJ didn't revisit her in The Rise of Skywalker, so I was quite disappointed with how she was handled. But being that she is so incredibly old, there's still a lot to tell with her character, and I would be really excited to see her pop up in The Mandalorian. As for non-Skywalker saga characters that we could see in The Mandalorian, there are two that jump out immediately, particularly after seeing the Season 1 finale. If you haven't seen it, stop this video now. But if you have seen it, you'll know at the very end of the episode, Moff Gideon pulls out the Darksaber and uses it to slice his way through that crashed TIE fighter to escape. But that then poses the question, how did he get the Darksaber? The last person that we knew of that had the Darksaber was Duchess Satine's sister, and it was given to her by Sabine Wren. So I'm very interested to see if either of those characters will pop up in The Mandalorian. I mean, they both are Mandalorians, and actually, in the last Mandalorian episode, I saw a helmet that looked very similar to Sabine's, so I do hope we get to see them in Season 2. And if we get to see Sabine, that makes me wonder if we're going to get to see Ahsoka. If you've seen the series finale of Star Wars Rebels, you'll know that they were last seen together, supposedly going off on a journey to go find Ezra. Now, this happened right after the Battle of Endor, so it would be 5 years before The Mandalorian takes place. So who knows? Are they still looking for Ezra? Have they ever found him? I certainly think that their character stories are going to be elaborated upon further eventually down the line, but I have a strong feeling that we'll see Sabine in Season 2 fighting with the Mandalorian trying to win back the Darksaber, and it's possible that wherever she is, Ahsoka is too. And we know that out of all of his creations, all of his contributions to Star Wars, Ahsoka is Dave Filoni's absolute favorite. People have been asking him if she would ever be implemented into live action, and this might be his chance to do it. Cad Bane would be another really interesting character to see in this show. He's honestly probably the most badass bounty hunter in all of Star Wars, and if they did something like sent him after Baby Yoda, that would be pretty crazy to see him try to track down the Mando and watch those two go at it. Hondo Ohnaka is another character that I could see in this show. He's a pirate, and as I said, this show is really trying to put an emphasis on the scum side of the universe, the smugglers, gangsters, bounty hunters, pirates, so I wouldn't be surprised to see him either. There are so many characters from the Clone Wars and Rebels that they could implement into this show, like Asajj Ventress, for example. I don't think that they would put anyone like Ezra or Grand Admiral Thrawn into the show just because of how significant to their particular show or in Star Wars lore in general they are. So I think if they were in anything, it would probably be something else later down the line, but who knows, they could totally be in it. I also wouldn't be surprised if they decided to pull from these spin-off films like Solo or Rogue One. Most specifically, I could see them using a character like Enfys Nest. She was so young during the events of Solo, she's probably roughly the same age as the Mandalorian, so she'd be grown up by this point, and she has very similar motives to our lead character, so I wouldn't be surprised to see her in this show at all. But that's about all I could come up with, but I'm interested to know, what do you guys think? What do you make of all this? Definitely let me know down in the comments below, and I will see you guys next time.